Hello. Right now, I want to introduce you to the concept of clauses. Clauses. Okay, a clause is a group of words within a sentence with its own subject and verb. Okay, a little different from a phrase, because a clause has both a subject and a verb, but it's part of a larger sentence. There are, in English, two kinds of clauses. There's the independent clause. An independent clause is a clause which can stand alone as a complete sentence. Okay? If you took the clause out of the sentence it was in, and it makes perfect sense by itself without adding or subtracting any words, then that's an independent clause. A subordinate clause is a clause which, although it has a subject and a verb, cannot stand alone as a complete sentence. It needs another clause. Now, some sources refer to subordinate clauses as dependent clauses. Our book calls them subordinate clauses, but you may come across another book or some other place that calls them dependent clauses, but it's the same thing. Okay, notice in this definition, for example, although it has a subject and a verb, is a good example of a subordinate clause. We take that out of the sentence and say, although it has a subject and a verb, what are you talking about? Although what has, it doesn't stand by itself as a complete thought. Okay, it needs something else, so it's a subordinate clause. One other term we sometimes use in relation to clauses is the term main clause. The main clause is the independent clause in a sentence which has subordinate clauses. Okay, so any sentence, if you want, one way of looking at it, you can say any sentence by itself is an independent clause. If the sentence has multiple clauses, it's got to have at least one independent clause, or it's not going to be able to stand by itself. And so that independent clause is known as the main clause. Here's an example. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Who comes in the name of the Lord is a clause. Notice it's, I've had actually two clauses. Blessed is he is one clause, and who comes in the name of the Lord is another clause. Blessed is he, it's a little poetic inversion, but okay, he is the subject, is blessed is the verb, and then who comes in the name of the Lord is another clause. In this case, comes is the verb, and who is the subject. Okay, and in the name of the Lord is, a couple of prepositional phrases modifying comes. Okay. So, here's a simple example of a sentence with two clauses. Obviously, blessed is he is the main clause. We can say that by itself, or we usually would say he is blessed, but it's the main clause. Okay, who comes in the name of the Lord is not a complete thought by itself. It is a subordinate clause. And somebody say, well, it begins with who, you could be asking a question. But yeah, if you're not asking a question, then it doesn't make sense by itself. It needs something else, unless you change the meaning. Knock, knock. Okay. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Okay, this has three short clauses. In this case, they're all independent clauses. Jesus loves me. This I know, or I know this, go with a little inversion. For the Bible tells me so. Okay. All three are independent clauses. All three can stand by themselves. But anyway, it does have three clauses. Many are called, but few are chosen. Again, many are called. Many is the subject. Are called is the verb. Few are chosen. Few is the subject, are chosen is the verb. in a couple of independent clauses, but a sentence made up of two clauses. When Mary saw Jesus, she thought that he was the gardener. Notice this one. This actually has three clauses if you think about it. When Mary saw Jesus, okay, saw is the verb, Mary is the subject. She thought is the verb, she is the subject. That he was the gardener, was is the verb, he was the subject. So we actually have three clauses here. She thought is one, and then that he was the gardener is the third clause. So, not uncommon in English. Not a very long sentence, but it's got three clauses. In this case, the main clause is she thought, so one independent clause, and then the others are subordinate clauses. A special trait of subordinate clauses is that, like phrases, they function as a single part of speech. Not main clauses, they're like sentences. But subordinate clauses, if you put them all together, they function as a single part of speech. So the rest of the time, I want to share the first part of speech that subordinate clauses can be. Namely, adjective clauses. An adjective clause is a subordinate clause that modifies a noun or a pronoun. That's what adjectives do, right? So an adjective clause is a clause, it's got a subject and a verb, that modifies a noun or a pronoun. So it would answer the question, because it's an adjective, you can also answer the question, which one, what kind, or how many. Those are the questions that adjectives answer. I have to tell you, pretty unusual to find an adjective clause that answers the question, how many, but it's possible. Adjective clauses usually begin with a relative pronoun. Occasionally, they begin with a relative adverb. Now, I know you studied relative pronouns first semester, so I'll just do a little review of them later, but I'm not going to worry about them a whole lot, and I'll talk a little bit more about relative adverbs. Most sources include relative adverbs among the subordinating conjunctions, but your textbooks treat them differently. Actually, that's wrong. Your textbook, sorry about that, treats them separately. Okay. Most sources, what your book calls relative adverbs, people will just include as part of the subordinating conjunctions, which you studied last semester. But anyway, this gives you some idea of what to expect. Here, again, we used this one before. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Okay, if you think about it, this clause, who comes in the name of the Lord, is an adjective clause because it modifies he. Which he? The one who comes in the name of the Lord. Okay. Also notice who is a relative pronoun. Okay? So the relative pronoun, it's called a relative pronoun because it relates, it's a pronoun, takes the place of a noun, that relates the subordinate clause to the rest of the sentence. So, who comes in the name of the Lord is an adjective clause, and who is the relative pronoun. Okay, relative pronouns normally function in two ways. They join or relate the clause to the word it modifies, and they function as part of the clause. So in the above adjective clause, which relate the word who, should have italicized that, relates the clause to the word he. But it also acts as the subject of the clause. So who comes in the name of the Lord? Okay, it relates he to the rest of the clause. Comes is the verb, and who is the subject. So, and that's pretty typical of what the relative pronouns do. They have two functions in the clause. Okay. In some sentences, the relative pronoun is dropped, but that's usually because the relative pronoun relates without having a function or a necessary function in the clause. And we'll see examples of that in just a couple of minutes. But occasionally, the relative pronoun will be dropped, or I guess you could say it's optional. Okay, Simon, whom Jesus called Peter, denied Jesus 3 times. Okay, whom Jesus called Peter modifies Simon. Adjective, clause. Notice, modifies Simon. And in this case, called is the verb, Jesus is the subject, and whom is the direct object in the clause. Takes the place of him. Simon, Jesus called him Peter. That's why it's a whom, because it's in the objective case. And Peter, of course, if whom is the direct object, then Peter is the object complement. Okay, then Simon denied Jesus 3 times is the main clause. In fact, I'll mention this. I think your book talks about this. A lot of times they will talk about adjective clauses being embedded in the main clause. Okay, it's kind of in the middle of the main clause. We see here, whom Jesus called Peter, is in the middle of the main clause. It actually separates the subject from the verb. Not uncommon, and we call that sometimes an embedded clause. So just mention that. Okay, Mary was the first person whom Jesus appeared to. Okay, Mary was the first person is the main clause. Whom Jesus appeared to is the adjective clause. It modifies person. Which person? One whom Jesus appeared to. Notice here, appeared is the verb of the clause. Jesus is the subject. And whom is actually the object of the preposition to whom Jesus appeared. Okay? A lot of times in everyday speech, we put the preposition at the end of a subordinate adjective clause. Now, we could say, we could drop the relative pronoun and just say Mary was the first person Jesus appeared to. Okay. In colloquial speech, oops, there's the bell. I'm going to have to pause for a minute.
Hi, Steve.
Okay, good. Now we can continue. Sorry about that. Okay, Mary was the first person Jesus appeared to. Okay, in this case, basically the same sentence, but a lot of times in colloquial speech, everyday speech, we are able to drop the relative pronoun. And then also, we could also say, Mary was the first person to whom Jesus appeared. This would be considered the best in formal writing. Some people are a little fussy about style and are uncomfortable with prepositions coming at the end of a sentence, even though there's it's perfectly understandable, and in English there's nothing ungrammatical about it. Style-wise, you do sometimes run into people that prefer having it this way. Anyway, any one of those 3 ways still says the same thing. And in each case, in this case, whom is the object of the preposition as well. Whoops. Okay. John, whose gospel tells us this, heard her story firsthand. Again, another embedded adjective clause, whose gospel tells us this. Modifies John. Tells us a little bit more about John. And in this case, in the clause, the verb is tells, the gospel is the subject, and whose is possessive. Basically, John's gospel tells us this, so whose is, possessive pronoun modifying gospel. Okay, so, occasionally we do have whose as a possessive. Whose, by the way, normally is the possessive of who, but sometimes it can be the possessive of which. So whose can apply to both persons and things. Okay, in modern English, there are only 5 relative pronouns. So, I could say, turn to page, 348 or whatever it is, and you can find the list, but I'm just telling you, who, whom, whose, that, which. Adjective clauses would normally have one of those 5 relative pronouns. Now, 4 of them, all but that, can have the suffix ever or so ever. And occasionally we'll have that. In fact, the term whatever has become kind of common. Whichever, whose ever, whoever, and occasionally you'll have so ever for emphasis. Whosoever, or a little more emphasis. Okay. Mentioned before, and your book has this, occasionally if a noun denoting time or place is modified by an adjective clause, the clause is introduced by a relative adverb, an adverb that relates the clause to the word it modifies. The 2 most common such adverbs are where and when. Other words which denote place or time could be used. You could probably come up with a sentence that might say after or something like that, before perhaps. You could introduce a clause that way, but where and when is the most common. Now, many sources consider these subordinating conjunctions, and I'll be honest, I was kind of taught that way, and I really prefer it that way, but your book calls them relative adverbs, so we will call them that to go along with what the book says. And sometimes they do have an adverbial function in the clause. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just relate. Sometimes they do have a function in the clause. So here are a couple examples. Behold the place where he lay. Okay, now where he lay modifies place, so it modifies a noun, so it is functioning as an adjective. But instead of being introduced by a relative pronoun, it's being introduced by where. Okay, and that would be the example of the relative adverb. Also, you could make a case that where is functioning in the clause modifying lay. He lay where. Now is the time when the seniors are looking forward to graduation. Okay, when the seniors are looking forward to graduation is a subordinate clause, in this case introduced by when modifies time. So it is an adjective clause because it's modifying a noun and beginning with the word when. Possibly could make a case that when is also modifying the verb are looking in the clause. But at any rate, when they talk about relative adverbs in your book, that is what they are talking about. The end. And be sure to read the assigned reading for additional examples and explanations. Thank you very much. God bless you.